the Medici.
Maria Salviati.
Please like this video so that more people have access to this content. Enjoy and also follow this channel to see other videos about art.
Maria Salviati. Born 1499, married 1516, died 1543. Maria Salviati, daughter of Jacopo Salviati and his wife, Lucrezia de Medici, and granddaughter of Lorenzo the Magnificent, is one of the most attractive characters of the age, though she lived in the worst time in Florentine history. Married at 17 to Giovanni de Medici, soon to be known as Giovanni della Bande Nere, who had been brought up with her from the time that she was 10 and he 11 years old, she made him a most excellent wife. She was of an exceedingly affectionate disposition. She was a virtuous woman in an age when it was the exception, and she was no less noteworthy for her strong sense, wisdom, and capacity. She helped Giovanni in all his difficulties, and whereas he was from his fiery and headstrong nature always ready to become involved in some trouble, she was ever on the watch from a distance, displaying a wonderful forethought, and sending him sound advice which saved him from many quarrels. Her letters to him, many of which are preserved in the state archives of Florence, are models of sense, wisdom, and the strongest affection combined. Her portrait by Vasari is sure to be a good likeness, as he knew her well. While Giovanni was absent on his almost perpetual campaigns, she remained living in her father's palace in the Corso at Florence, where in 1519 her son, Cosimo, was born. During the next 3 years, Giovanni, having attained command of a troop, was mounting by rapid steps in his profession, and gaining great distinction owing to his invariable success wherever employed, so that the occasions when he was able to be with her were few. And when, in 1523, Pope Adrian VI was succeeded by Clement VII, this became still more the case. By this time her young husband, all whose youthful aspirations she had shared as a girl, had become one of the most renowned commanders in Italy, and she saw less and less of him. But this did not in any way prevent his being her one consideration at all times, and wherever we hear of her, she seems to have no other care or interest but his well-being. Her life had in it much sadness, for seeing plainly Pope Clement's manoeuvres to oust Giovanni from his rights and keep him always in the field, in the hope that he would eventually get killed, she yet found it impossible to get Giovanni to guard his own interests, while she also lived in perpetual dread of hearing of his death. And the higher he rose in his profession, and the more the cloud of war spread over northern Italy, as it did almost uninterruptedly during the last 3 years of his life, the more impossible did it become for Giovanni to give any attention to his domestic affairs, or to be with the wife who loved him so devotedly. Maria Salviati reveals herself completely to us in her letters, and the more we see of her, the more attractive she becomes. Monsieur Gautier calls her "this wife who remained always a lover, a modern woman of passion and nerves, out of place among these suits of armour, these swords and noises of war." And again, after quoting long extracts from her letters, he exclaims, "Such tenderness, such womanly words." In a touching letter to Giovanni in reference to a quarrel he had got into, she implores him to keep out of such broils, and not to destroy us both by these frequent quarrels, and signs herself "your desolate wife, who commends herself to you with face covered with tears." At the same time she is far from being weak, and one knows not which to admire the most, her great love for her warrior husband, her pleading tenderness, her gentle reproach, her ceaseless solicitude for his welfare, or her sagacious wisdom and strong common sense. The tender pathos of many of her letters is indescribable. She knew that in the years before he was 25 he was, while absent at Rome, often unfaithful to her, and that she was supplanted by low rivals. And in her letters written at that time, it is the peculiar combination of this knowledge, of which she speaks openly, of tender reproach to him for treating her so, and yet of an unswerving affection, care for his welfare, and sensible advice to keep him out of this or that quarrel, which makes them so singularly touching. Giovanni spent nearly all his private funds on his troops, and, as previously noted, Maria was continually occupied in providing what he required, though it was often difficult to find the necessary money, and that he thus relied upon her to purchase for him such things as horses, arms, and other military equipment, shows how well he knew her sound sense and judgment. At last the news came which she had all along dreaded, and she heard of his being mortally wounded, which news was followed almost immediately by that of his death. His friend Pietro Aretino writes to her of how he had himself put Giovanni's body in its coffin, telling her of his own great grief, which, however, he says, must be far less than hers. He describes the funeral at Mantua, and with a fine touch of sympathy for the desolate wife, speaks of how the women gazed from the windows with awe and reverence upon the honoured form of him who was your husband, Signora, and my lord. Maria replies by a striking letter, dignified and sensible, saying what a comfort it had been to her throughout the campaign to feel that he was with her husband. And then she urges him to write the history of her husband's life, suggesting that he shall write the history of its last 14 years, and she, with the help of her father, will write that of the first 14 years. And she ends by a request that he will commend myself and my poor Cosimo to the Marquis of Mantua, who has been so kind. Reading these letters of Maria's, it is hard to realize that it is all so long ago. We feel that it might have happened yesterday. Here, as so often, we feel how much closer the 16th century is to us than, e.g., the 18th. For the next 10 years, 1527 to 1537, i.e., during the 3 years of the revolt of Florence from Pope Clement, the year of the siege, and the reign of Alessandro as Duke, Maria Salviati lived in the greatest retirement at Trebbia, in the Mugello, about 20 miles from Florence, devoting herself to the education of her son Cosimo. The only occasion on which she came out of this retirement was in 1533, when, as Catherine de Medici's nearest relative, she accompanied the latter to Marseilles for her marriage. Maria lived this retired life for 2 reasons. Not only was she very badly off, most of her patrimony having been absorbed by her husband's military necessities, but also she lived in constant fear for her son, now that the elder branch had no legitimate male descendant, knowing well that both Pope Clement and Alessandro were utterly unscrupulous, and looked with no friendly eye on one whose existence might be supposed to be an obstacle to Alessandro's being ruler of Florence. The only other male representative of the younger branch, besides her son, was Lorenzino, and Alessandro knew that the latter possessed no influence, and would never set up any claim to the rule of Florence. But it might be otherwise with the son of Giovanni della Bande Nere, to whom his father's name and reputation would give plenty of adherents. Not that Maria had any desire at all that such claims should be put forward on behalf of her son. Her gallant soldier's death ended all life for her, and she felt a complete repugnance for all the strivings of ambition and worldly honours. She became a member of the Third Order of St. Dominic, giving herself up to charitable works, and she kept her son out of sight of Florence and its affairs, training him to take pleasure in field sports and a country life, and secluding him so effectually, as far as Florence was concerned, that the mass of the citizens scarcely knew that such a youth existed. The poverty to which she had been reduced is shown by a letter of hers written in 1530 to Filippo Strozzi, the wealthy banker, and head of the Strozzi family, who was one of her creditors. She says, "Magnificent and much respected Sir, we are, my son and I, to that degree impoverished and broken down, not only by private debts, but by those due to the government, that we are in a desperate position, unless we can find someone who will assist us until we can get breathing time. We therefore suppliantly entreat your magnificence that, if the other creditors press and crush us, as you will have the more pity on us, and, as you have had from us 200 ducats up to this time, that you will be content to bear with us for this year. I declare to you on my faith that it is impossible for us to do more, and I will use every effort to meet you in such a manner as you will find satisfactory at the end of the time named. I implore and beseech your Excellency, and with all my heart beg of you, not to deny us this favour. For should you decide otherwise, and determine on pressing us, I know of no means of meeting your claim. We will not the less strive our utmost to put together another 200 ducats within this year, if it be any way possible, and if you will not have patience with us for the entire debt. Our gratitude will be greater should you give us 1 year's time for the whole sum, yet it will be no less if you will content yourself with the 200 ducats. I will say no more, save that Cosimo and I commend ourselves earnestly to your magnificence. Your cousin and sister, Maria Salviati de Medici. At length, when Maria had been a widow for 10 years, and when her son Cosimo was 17½ years old, there occurred in January 1537 Duke Alessandro's sudden assassination, whereupon her son suddenly and without consulting her made his bold bid for power. His mother liked neither the thing itself nor his methods, and endeavoured to persuade him to abandon the course on which he had embarked, which greatly enraged him. And the cruelty which a few months later he displayed against those who had opposed him still more deeply pained his gentle-spirited and high-minded mother, strengthening her strong disapproval of his whole course of action. This caused a complete estrangement between them. From the time he became Duke of Florence he never went near her, and she suffered many things from his harsh and unlovely disposition. On her son becoming head of the state, she removed from Trebbia to the villa at Castello, where her husband had lived as a boy, and there resided during the remaining 6 years of her life, seldom seeing anyone, and devoting herself to religion and good works. Her son's conduct was the last drop of sadness in a life which had always been sad, while we are told that Cosimo displayed towards her such an utter want of affection that even when she was lying ill at the villa of Castello, and he was shooting in the vicinity, he could hardly be persuaded to relinquish the pleasures of the chase for a single day to visit her on her deathbed. A few days later her gentle spirit passed away. Maria Salviati died at Castello in 1543, 16 years after her son became Duke of Florence, and was buried dressed in the habit of the Third Order of St. Dominic. In after years her remains were removed from their first resting place to be laid beside those of her husband when brought from Mantua. When the Medici coffins were opened in 1857, her body was found unimpaired. Her coffin bore only her simple name, Maria. She and Giovanni della Bande Nere lie side by side in the centre of the crypt of the great family mausoleum, with round them their descendants, the Grand Dukes and Grand Duchesses, Princes and Princesses of Tuscany. End of section 22.
We hope you enjoyed this video. Please let us know in the comments what other art contents you would like to see. And don't forget to like this video and follow our channel. Thank you, and until the next video.